pretty devastating report by NBC here. U.S. and European officials broach topic of peace negotiations with Ukraine, sources say. The conversations have included very broad outlines of what Ukraine might need to give up to reach a deal with Russia. Okay, so this is November 5th. The war started February of last year. So it's been, 20 months of slaughter, of violence, of destruction, hundreds of thousands killed, over 500,000 between deaths and injuries, all to get to where we said we were going to get to at the very beginning of this conflict. U.S. and European officials have begun quietly talking to the Ukrainian government about what possible peace negotiations with Russia might entail to end the war, according to one current senior U.S. official and one former senior U.S. official familiar with the discussions. The conversations have included very broad outlines of what Ukraine might need to give up to reach a deal, the officials said. Some of the talks, which officials described as delicate, took place last month during a meeting of representatives from more than 50 nations supporting Ukraine, including NATO members, known as the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the officials said. The discussions are an acknowledgement of the dynamics militarily on the ground in Ukraine and politically in the U.S. and Europe, officials said. They began amid concerns among U.S. and European officials that the war has reached a stalemate and about the ability to continue providing aid to Ukraine, officials said. Biden administration officials are also worried that Ukraine is running out of forces while Russia has a seemingly endless supply.
Oh, really? Do they?
Right?
Do they?
It's almost like you can't win a war of attrition against the largest country in the world, which is what we said as pretty much know-nothings on the subject when the war started. I knew next to nothing. Like I said, I'm a millennial. I'm a 9/11 Mideast war kid. I wasn't versed in this stuff. I didn't know what the hell was going on between Russia and Ukraine when it sounded like Russia was going to invade. I had to learn very quickly on the spot, but not knowing much of anything at all, I said at the very beginning, the deal that gets made to settle this war is going to look very much like the deal on the table right now, meaning February of last year, and that all of this death is going to be a waste. What did Jeremy Corbyn say? A guy who, also branded an anti-Semite for believing in the dignity and humanity of people in Gaza and the West Bank. What did that lunatic say? He said, all wars end in diplomacy, so why don't we skip the killing part and go straight to the talking part? Ridiculous, lunatic, idiot, Putin puppet. Well, now here we are, almost 2 years later. Ukraine is also struggling with recruiting and has recently seen public protests about some of Zelensky's open-ended conscription requirements. They're taking people in their 50s now to fight on the front lines of Ukraine. They're running out of people. Russia was never going to run out of people. Why? Because if you look at a map, you see the size of Russia and the size of Ukraine. Anybody who has any sense of proportionality, you don't have to know history. You just have to know size, shapes. My child probably could have told you Russia was going to win because they could see how big Russia is and how small Ukraine is next to it.
Anyone who has ever played a game of Risk could have told you how this was going to end.
Exactly. And there is unease in the U.S. government, with how much less public attention the war in Ukraine has garnered since the Israel-Hamas war began nearly a month ago, the officials said. Officials fear that shift could make securing additional aid for Kiev more difficult. Last slide on this article here. Some U.S. military officials have privately begun using the term stalemate to describe the current battle in Ukraine.
And I just want to insert, I don't know if you grabbed that graphic. I sent it to you kind of at the last minute. I didn't even realize this. Russia has taken 18% of Ukraine.
Yes.
That's not even a stalemate. I mean, where I come from, we call that winning. Aren't you winning if you've taken 18% of the enemy's territory?
Yeah, well, eastern Ukraine is now pretty much under Russian control. And since then, obviously, because that was done relatively early on, within the past year or so, the front line has barely moved. I believe it was Glenn Greenwald who tweeted that out. I'm sure others did too, but I think his tweet got out there a lot, showing a graphic of the front lines between Russia and Ukraine. They've pretty much not moved in the last year. Because don't forget, the war is over, or almost, 2 years old right now. So they have begun using the term stalemate to describe the current battle but some saying it may come down to which side can maintain a military force the longest. Again, obviously, anybody could have told you the Russians were going to be able to outlast Ukraine. Neither side is making large strides on the battlefield, which some U.S. officials now describe as a war of inches. Officials also have privately said Ukraine likely only has until the end of the year or shortly thereafter before more urgent discussions about peace negotiations should begin. U.S. officials have shared their views on such a timeline with European allies, officials said. Any decisions about negotiations are up to Ukraine, Adrian Watson, spokesperson for the NSC, said in a statement. We are focused on continuing to stand strongly in support of Ukraine as they defend their freedom and independence against Russian aggression. An administration official also noted that the U.S. has participated with Ukraine in discussion of its peace summit framework, but said the White House is not aware of any other conversations with Ukraine about negotiations at the moment. So obviously there's been reporting by Seymour Hersh that Zelensky and his top aides have made off pretty well, siphoning off a lot of this aid money. Even if you don't believe in that reporting, one thing we certainly know for sure, and
it was in the report this week that we covered.
Oh yeah,
who did that article? Was that Politico? It was Politico.
Yeah, I think so.
The article that the people that the anonymous sources they talked to said they're robbing this blind. I mean, not those exact words, but something to that effect.
Right. Yeah. So no, there's been a lot of reporting on that. Even if you don't believe any of that, or even if you dismiss all of that as insignificant, what we know, we've done segments on this in the past. We've heard earnings calls from Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. The earnings for the defense contractors have been massive. They are the only ones who end up winning these wars. This is what I said. This is this is like deja vu from February of 2022 when we were just a little Facebook show. I said the only people who are going to make out are the people who profit off of funding the war. Everyone else loses. There's not going to be a settlement in the end that is much different from Russia's original terms, which are neutral Ukraine, no NATO for Ukraine, Russian recognition of Crimea, which they have, and independence for the separatist regions, which now it looks like Russia may be able to just claim those regions
They're
outright.
just going to pull it in. Right.
And so what did they get for all of this? Maybe Zelensky's wife got some nice new wardrobe. But other than that, this has been an absolute disaster, a tragic, unthinkably tragic disaster for who? For the Ukrainian people, which is why we said from day one, the pro-Ukrainian position was always to call for a peace deal. Ukrainian meaning the people of Ukraine, the ordinary people of Ukraine who should not have to pay for the crimes of NATO and the West, or for whatever grift the Ukrainian government has going. So there you have it. Now, almost 2 years later, and one more war later, obviously, they're saying, hey, you know what? Maybe time to wrap this up. Unbelievable.
Yeah, the Ukrainian people were just fed into a meat grinder for the profit of the military-industrial complex and for Zelensky and the people around him to enrich themselves on U.S. aid. Anybody with any sense was saying this from the beginning. Anybody who knew anything about Russian history, and even people who don't, as you say, you were a Desert Storm Iraq war kid, so that was more your focus.
Right.
Yeah, like of course, Russia was like the big bad guy, so yeah, Xers had a fascination with Russia, particularly if you were history inclined. But Jesus fucking Christ, man, you people never heard of Stalingrad? Nobody ever read about Napoleon's campaign? Jesus, like what did you think was going to happen? Just numerically, the idea that Ukraine could win this war was always patently absurd. Russia had too much at stake to give up. And given that, they were always going to win a war of attrition, inevitably, even if they fought it badly. I was talking to somebody just last week who still was saying, well, Putin didn't know what he got into. Because they're so fucking brainwashed by their corporate media. And this is what's most frustrating about this. You know these stupid motherfuckers are just going to go along with the next narrative. Do you never learn? Do these people never learn fucking no WMDs. Trump's never going to be president, right? Like, do they never learn? Oh, yeah, no, Ukraine's got this. They got this. And they'll go along with whatever the next narrative is.
Please clap.